Arguing against the motion, the actor, broadcaster and author Stephen Fry and the journalist and commentator Christopher Hitchens.
Now, I'm sorry, though, to have to begin by disagreeing with His Grace. If you're going to be a serious grown-up person and appear to defend the Catholic Church in public in front of an educated and literate audience, you simply have to start by making a great number of heartfelt apologies and requests for contrition and forgiveness. You're fully entitled to ask, brothers and sisters, who am I to say that? Well, in the Jubilee Millennium year of 2000, the Vatican spokesman, Bishop Piero Marini, said, given the number of sins we've committed in the course of 20 centuries, reference to them must necessarily be rather summary. His Holiness on that occasion, it was March the 12th, 2000, if you wish to look it up, begged forgiveness for, among some other things, the Crusades, the Inquisition, the persecution of the Jewish people, injustice towards women, that's half the human race right there, and the forced conversion of indigenous peoples, especially in South America. And that followed a whole series of preceding apologies, or apologies, I would say, of a kind, made by the late Pope John Paul, who, it troubles me not at all to say, was a very impressive and serious human being. It followed no less than 94, count them, public recognitions on his part of appalling crime and error and cruelty and stupidity and offences to the free intelligence, ranging from the African slave trade, apologized for in 1995, the admission that Galileo was right about the relationship between the sun and the earth and other orbs, which came in 1992, one might add. No, I won't say, it's too easy to say better late than never. Here, I said it. To violence and torture, legalized torture. Torture was legalized and institutionalized by the Roman Pontiff during the Counter-Reformation. That came in 1995. And for silence during Hitler's final solution, or Shoah, as well as, in 1999, coming in just under the Millennium Jubilee wire, an apology for the burning alive in the main square of Prague of the great Czech Protestant Jan Hus. The papacy is also asked to be forgiven for the sack of Constantinople and the massacre of Byzantine Christianity in April 1204, as part of the Fourth Crusade, the anathema on all Eastern Orthodox Christians as unbelievers, heretics, and people dwelling outside the health of the Church was lifted only in 1964. He also expressed sorrow about the murder and forced conversion of Serbian Orthodox Christians in the Balkans during the Second World War. And it doesn't end there. There are smaller but significant, equally significant, avowals of a very bad conscience. These have included regret for the rape and the torture of orphans and other children in church-run schools in almost every country on earth. I'm pleased to see that due reconsideration is now being given, and may in fact have been given, to the doctrine of limbo, St. Augustine's cruel and stupid disposal solution to a non-existent problem, that is to say, the destination of the souls of unbaptized children. Up until now, Catholic parents have been taught that's where their unbaptized children went, a form of torture that's sometimes worse than the physical. Now it seems that this piece of Augustinian sadism is undergoing reconsideration. But remember, this is from a church that, on the whole, cannot err. We still await a more direct admission. For example, I give some suggestions of my own while we're at it. I would like them to take back the Concordat made with Adolf Hitler, the first treaty he ever signed, giving the Church a monopoly over education in Germany in exchange for the dissolution of the Catholic Centre Party, to give the Nazi Party a clear run. I'd have apologized for the Lateran Pact with Mussolini, myself, also the first treaty ever signed by that fascist dictator. I would also think I'd want to reconsider the fact that Father Tiso, head of the Nazi puppet state in Slovakia, was a priest in holy orders, that the Croatian fascist puppet state, the Ustaša state of Ante Pavelić, was also operating under full clerical protection and disguise, as was the regime of General Franco and the dictator Antonio Salazar. And I really think I would beg forgiveness for this. I don't think the German church should have asked Hitler's birthday to be celebrated from the pulpit every year until he died. These are very serious matters, but I draw your attention not just to the apologies, ladies and gentlemen, but to the evasive and euphemistic form that they take. Joseph Ratzinger, the current Pope, considered by some, by Catholics, to be the vicar of Christ on earth, says of Indians, of the Indians who were massacred in the course of conversion in Brazil, after the apology had been made to them, he said, nonetheless, it must be remembered that before we came to convert them, they were silently awaiting the arrival of the church. I don't think that's a very genuine kind of apology to you. In his comment, one of the few he's made on the institutionalization of rape and torture and maltreatment of children in Catholic institutions, he has said, it's a very severe crisis which involves us, he said, in the following: in the need for applying to these victims the most loving pastoral care. Well, I'm sorry, they've already had that. And to say that this is the responsibility laid upon you by the horrific admission that you've already had to make is not accepting responsibility in any adult sense. When I say child abuse was institutional, how dare I say so? How can I prove it? How can I prove such a thing? Well, I'll ask His Grace, and I'll ask Anne Widdecombe. Where is Cardinal Bernard Law now? Where is he? Where is the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston, whose resignation was indignantly demanded, finally, by 50 members of the Church and by the whole laity of Massachusetts, who also demanded his prosecution for the promotion and protection and covering up and apology for and defense of people whose crimes against children are too revolting to specify. And he's not in the jurisdiction of Massachusetts now, as perhaps you know. He's the Supreme Vicar of the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, personally appointed by the Pope to that as well as many other important sinecures. And in 2005, this man, a fugitive from justice and from complicity in the filthiest crime that it's possible for a human being to imagine, was one of those voting in conclave to decide who the next vicar of Christ on earth will be. I don't know. I think I'd like to hear a bit more shame about this. Rape and torture of children is not something to be relativized. It's not something to be excused as a few bad priests. It's certainly not to be excused by the hideously false claim made by some Catholic conservatives that this wouldn't have happened if queers hadn't been allowed into the church. I'm sorry to say that queerdom in the church is an old story too. It's much worse than pornography, and it's much worse than bad language on TV. And it's the crime that cries out for punishment. And it's the one thing the church has decided to excuse itself for. Since some Christians fell into error, some Christians allowed themselves to be deceived in this way and to act against the gospel. Anti-Semitism was preached as an official doctrine of the church until 1964. The Jewish people were accused collectively as a people of deicide, of the crime of the murder of God in the figure of Jesus of Nazareth. And that anathema on them was not lifted until 64, well after perpetrators of the Holocaust had stood trial in secular courts and been rightly punished for their actions. How can this church say it has any moral superiority? It has difficulty catching up to what ordinary people regard as common moral and ethical sense, and it still can't make itself apologize properly. It is said of the Crusades, of the complicity with the Holocaust, of the political and diplomatic alliance with fascism, of all of these things, it is said, well, violence was committed in the service of the truth. So how is an apology possible? How is any understanding or undertaking or firm purpose of amendment to be allowed when the original sin, the problem in the first place, is the belief on the part of this church that it does possess a truth that we don't have, and it does have a God-given right, a warrant, a mandate of heaven to tell other people what to do, not just in their public, but in their private lives. And until that is changed, till that fantastic and sinister and non-founded claim is changed, these crimes will go on repeating themselves, being partially denied, partially admitted when it's too late to do anything else, and covered up. Behind all these crimes and miseries is the denial of what we on this side of the House affirm, which is that the only little candle of hope that our species does possess, our poor, bare, forked, primate, mammalian species, of whom you have two such splendid examples on this side of the House, is the unfettered intelligence, the method of free inquiry in philosophy and in science, and the refusal to admit that any one person can tell you not to do that. And the Church has always stood and still stands against it. Now, There will come a time when the Church will issue apologies and explanations and half-baked appeals for forgiveness for things it's still doing. I think that there will be an apology for what happened in Rwanda, the most Catholic country in Africa, one of the most Catholic countries in the world, where priests and nuns and bishops are on trial for inciting from their pulpits and on the church's radio stations and newspapers the massacre of their brothers and sisters. And the papacy was silent on this appalling occasion, and everyone in Rwanda knows it. And there hasn't yet been a properly written apology for that disgrace. Staying in Africa, I think it will one day be admitted with shame that it might have been in error to say that AIDS is bad as a disease, very bad, but not quite as bad as condoms are bad, or not as immoral in the same way. I say it in the presence of His grace, and I say it to His face. The preachings of His church are responsible for the death and suffering and misery of millions of His brother and sister Africans, and He should apologize for it. He should show some shame. Fourth, for condemning my friend Stephen Fry for his nature, for saying you couldn't be a member of our church, you're born in sin. There's a revolting piece of casuistry that's sometimes offered on this point. Yeah, we hate the sin only, we love the sinner. He's not being condemned for what he does, he's being condemned for what he is. You're a child made in the image of God. Oh no, you're not. And you can't join your church and you can't go to heaven. This is disgraceful, it's inhuman, it's obscene, and it comes from a clutch of hysterical, sinister virgins who've already betrayed their charge in the children of their own church. If you come to a Catholic youth festival in Sydney, Australia, where I just was, you'll get a certain remission from purgatory or hell. It may be temporary. If you come a lot and you give a lot, you'll get possibly permanent remission from the eternal punishment that they don't know any more about than you and I do. This is the sale of indulgences blatantly, openly. It's the same temptation that was offered to those who set off on that fourth crusade that's just been apologized for, and killed all the Jews of Europe on their way, sacked Byzantine Christianity when they got to Constantinople, and then went on to massacre the Arabs and Muslims. They were offered paradise if they died committing these terrible crimes against humanity. But if you see what I mean, therefore, the stimulus to crime, the impetus to crime, the belief in certainty, the belief that a divine warrant entitles you to do whatever you like, is the sin that must be cancelled, that must be annealed, that must somehow be apologized for. I don't wish any ill on any fellow primate or mammal of mine, even if this primate or mammal claims to be a primate in possession of a secret that's denied to me. I can forgive even that because I live in a country where their reign doesn't run, their writ doesn't apply. So I don't at all look forward to the death of Joseph Ratzinger, I don't. When he dies, there's quite a long interval till the conclave can meet to pick another pope. Sometimes it goes on for months till they get the white smoke. And for that whole time, that whole interval, it's a delicious, lucid interlude, there isn't anyone on earth who claims to be infallible. Isn't that nice? All I want to propose in closing is this, that if the human species is to rise to the full height that's demanded by its dignity and by its intelligence, we must all of us move to a state of affairs where that condition is permanent. And I think we should get on with it. Okay, thank you for having me.
Bishop, ladies and gentlemen, there are occasions, as Gwendolyn remarked, in The Importance of Being Earnest, when it becomes more than a moral duty to speak one's mind, it becomes a pleasure. This is one such occasion with my trusty Hitch by my side. They are welcome to their sacraments, they're welcome to their reliquaries and to their Blessed Virgin Mary. They're welcome to their faith, to the importance they place in it, to the comfort and the joy that they receive from it. All of that is absolutely fine by me. It would be impertinent and wrong of me to express any antagonism towards any individual who wishes to find salvation in whatever form they wish to express it. It's also very important to me, as it happens, that I have my own beliefs. They are a belief in the Enlightenment, they are a belief in the eternal adventure of trying to discover moral truth in the world. It's a fight, it's an empirical fight. It's one that was begun in the middle of the last millennium. It's given the name the Enlightenment. And there is nothing, sadly, that the Catholic Church and its hierarchs likes to do more than to attack the Enlightenment. It did so at the time. Reference was made to Galileo and the fact that he was tortured for trying to explain the Copernican theory of the universe. That's history. History, as Miss Widdicombe has reminded us, is irrelevant. It's not important. Well, I beg to differ. History whinnies and quivers and vibrates in all of us, in this hall. Christopher made mention of limbo. It seems so tedious and so silly, one of those little casuistic games that Thomists and others play. Aquinas and Augustine of Hippo both proposed this extraordinary idea that babies who were unbaptized would not know heaven, that a soul needs to be prayed for in order to go to heaven, in order to turn left when he enters the aeroplane of heaven and get a first-class seat. That he needs to be prayed for, and for many hundreds, indeed over 1,000 years, you'll be amazed what generous terms those prayers came at. Sometimes as little or as 2/3 of a year's salary could ensure that a dead loved one would go to heaven. And if you were rich enough, you could have a chantry built, and monks would permanently sing prayers so that that existence in heaven for the child would go up and up and up until they were at the table of the Lord themselves. Now, all this is in the past and is irrelevant. I cede to Anne Widdicombe how irrelevant it is, except in one thing. This church is founded on the principle of intercession. Only through the apostolic succession, only through the laying on of hands from this Galilean carpenter, whom we can all admire, only from the laying on of hands to his apostles, to St. Peter, to the other bishops, all the way down to everyone consecrated in this room. Anyone ordained here will know they have this extraordinary power to change the molecules of wine into blood, literally, to change the molecules of paste bread into flesh, literally, and to forgive the sins of the peasants and the poor whom they routinely exploit around the planet. Only this church has this extraordinary principle that it is through these male priests, and only male priests, that this is given. It is a doctrinal fact. It is more than a doctrinal fact, it is a dogma. Extra ecclesiam nulla salus. Outside the church, there is no salvation. That is a dogma of the church that has been used to excuse all the missionary zeal, all the rape and torture of the Aztecs and the Incas, all the horrors of South America and Africa and the Philippines and the rest of the world, to which other churches and other cultures have also their guilt to admit. However, the particular nature of the exploitation of the poor, the vulnerable, and the young. If I were to talk to a priest now, believe me, that priest would be the most worldly, charming, self-deprecating. He would be a sort of ha-ha-ha priest, and the superstition and the nonsense that we read about of the church, it's absolute. Don't pay any attention, Stephen. Just join and have a marvelous time as a Catholic, and everything is lovely and splendid. But be poor and ignorant. Just imagine in this square mile how many people were burned for reading the Bible in English. The idea that the Catholic Church exists to disseminate the word of the Lord is nonsense, but they are the ones it can tell and bully and domineer. And then we come to children. Well, it's all very well to say the world didn't know better. The world had no knowledge of how dangerous a crime child abuse was. I want to read you some of the words of Ratzinger, the current Pope. Staggers me to admit that he is the head of state of a country, and it was his job to deal with the child abuse scandal that was brewing. His first act was to write a letter to Catholic bishops ordering them on pain of excommunication not to talk to the police or anyone else. Investigation should be handled, he wrote, and I'm quoting that letter, in the most secretive way, restrained by perpetual silence. And Ratzinger described the whole affair as causing suffering for the church and for me personally. He also said the answer would be to stop homosexuals from being allowed into the church. It's perhaps unfair of me as a gay man to moan that this enormous institution, which is the largest and most powerful church on earth, has over 1 billion, as they like to tell us, members, each one of whom is under strict instructions to believe the dogmas of the church, but may wrestle with them personally, of course. It's a little hard for me to know that I am disordered, or again, to quote Ratzinger, that I'm guilty of a moral evil, simply by fulfilling my sexual destiny as I see it. It's hard for me to be told that I'm evil, because I think of myself as someone who is filled with love, whose only purpose in life was to achieve love, and who feels love for so much of nature and the world and for everything else, and who, like anybody decent and of an education, realizes that in order to achieve and receive love, it's a struggle. It's not one that needs a pope to tell you how to do it. It certainly isn't one who needs a pope to tell you that you're evil. With 6% of all teenage suicides being gay teenage suicides, we certainly don't need the stigmatization, the victimization that leads to the playground bullying when people say you're a disordered, morally evil individual. That's not nice. It isn't nice. The kind of cruelty in Catholic education, the kind of let's not call it child abuse, it was child rape. The kind of child rape that went on systematically for so long. Let's imagine that we can overlook this and say it is nothing whatever to do with the structure and nature of the Catholic Church and the twisted, neurotic, and hysterical way that its leaders are chosen. The celibacy, the nuns, the monks, the priesthood. This is not natural and normal, ladies and gentlemen. For me to be called a pervert by these extraordinarily sexually dysfunctional people, I don't think human history has ever had more. I have to say, this is not a problem that necessarily is permanent. I like to believe that in 10 years' time I could come back and argue the opposite. Even though I've talked about the history and the structural problems of this benighted institution, and the cruelty and the unpleasantness it has caused around the world, I have yet to approach one of the subjects dearest to my heart. I've made 3 documentary films on the subject of AIDS in Africa. My particular love is the country of Uganda. It's one of the countries I love most in the world. There was a period when Uganda had the worst incidence of HIV/AIDS in the world. I went to Rakai, the village where it was first spotted. But through an amazing initiative called ABC, abstinence, be faithful, correct use of condoms, those 3, I am not denying that abstinence is a very good way of not getting AIDS. It really is. It works. So does being faithful. But so do condoms. And do not deny it. And this Pope, not satisfied with saying condoms are against our religion, please consider first abstinence, second being faithful to your partner. He spreads the lie that condoms actually increase the incidence of AIDS. He actually makes sure that aid is conditional on saying no to condoms. It is unbelievable, the pain and suffering you see. I'm not trying to argue against religion on this occasion. I'm not saying there's any... I understand the desire of anybody to seek spiritual rewards in a complex and difficult to understand world. We don't know why we're here, where we're going. We want answers. We love the idea of answers. How marvelous it would be. But there are other choices. There are all kinds of ways we can search for the truth. You do not need this imperial panoply of marble and gold. Do you know who would be the last person ever to be accepted as a prince of the church? The Galilean carpenter, that Jew they would kick him out before he tried to cross the threshold. He would be so ill at ease in the church. That simple and remarkable man, if he said the things that he was said to have said, what would he think? What would he think of St. Peter's? What would he think of the wealth and the power and the self-justification and the wheedling apologies? What would he think of a man who calls himself the Father, a celibate who dared to lecture people on what family values are? What would he think of any of that? He would be horrified. And it is no accident that the UN Cairo Population Conference, when they were trying to do something about the world's population spinning out of control, Vatican City, as a nation-state represented at that conference, made a joint statement with the Islamic countries of the world, notably the most extreme Islamic countries of the world, led by Saudi Arabia, and it began, on behalf of the revealed religions of the world, ... And what it did was essentially hobble and veto any possibility of women's sexual freedom in the world, because as we know, the Islamic religion and the Catholic Church have never been anything other than implacably opposed to women's choice in their own bodies and their destinies. There is a solution, there is an answer, there is redemption available for all of us and any one of us. The Pope could decide that all this power, all this wealth, this hierarchy of princes and bishops and archbishops and priests and monks and nuns could be sent out in the world with money and art treasures to put them back in the countries that they once raped and violated, whose original systems of animism and belief and simplicity they told would take them straight to hell. They could give that money away, and they could concentrate on the apparent essence of their belief. And then I would stand here and say the Catholic Church may well be a force for good in the world. But until that day, it is not. Thank you.
Now, if one thing that the Catholic Church does do for good, in my opinion, is give us the Ten Commandments, a very basic, obvious way of giving us some kind of moral guidance. Would you not agree with that?
Okay, Ten Commandments. Christopher Hitchens, that question was directed to you. I don't think the Catholic Church has a monopoly on the Ten Commandments, but nevertheless.
The lady in front began by asking me, do I reserve this condemnation only for the Holy Roman Church and not for other Catholics, for example, like Byzantine Catholics and Protestants and so on? I think they're all the same equivalent glimpses of the identical untruth. The proper study of mankind is man, and the proper application of humanitarianism is humanistic, in my judgment. Now, of the commandments, the first, I can't list them exactly in order, I have them in my head. The first two or three are entirely about fearing the author of the orders. Entirely about being terrified of someone who you're enjoined to love. I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but the idea of compulsory love has always struck me as a bit shady, especially if you're ordered to love someone who you absolutely must fear.
I actually think that if you look at the moral precepts of the Ten Commandments, they're as relevant now as they were then.
Anne raised a point regarding the billions that are poured into Africa. She also mentioned the billions that are raised in collections. What is the point there? Are you trying to say that the billions that are poured into Africa are raised by collections? Because we don't seem to see any dissolution of the wealth that is sat in the Vatican and in the palaces of the Vatican. And coupled with that, I respect your faith, I respect the message you give, but why, to pass that message on, do you need the finery that you wear? Do you need the palace of the Vatican?
Archbishop, of which current Roman Catholic policy are you most ashamed?
I don't know whether you are serious in that question or you just want to provoke, because if all our Catholic policies are not just dreamt overnight by the Pope or anybody. If it is a Catholic policy, it is reasonable, it is based on our traditions and scriptures, and there's none about which I'm ashamed.
Well, his question was, you talked about the billions in aid that goes to Africa, dispensed by Catholic organisations one way or another, but what about the wealth of the Vatican itself? Do you need all that money?
And I don't know what billions of that he says the Vatican has. The billions of this world, I think, are not in the Vatican. We know where they are, and they are not coming to Africa. On the contrary, Africa has been sucked dry.
Why not women priests in the Catholic Church?
I don't believe that it is any more possible for a woman to represent Christ at the point of consecration than for a man to be the Virgin Mary.
Question to Anne and the Archbishop. How can the Church possibly sustain and justify taking money from the impoverished in Mexico, in Latin America, in Africa, and at the same time suggesting that you're a force for good?
Question for Anne Widdicombe, actually. You accused Christopher Hitchens of judging the Catholic Church by the standards of the time, but surely the truths in your doctrines are either eternal or they're not.
Stephen Fry, the question about the Catholic Church apparently doesn't condemn homosexuality, that question asked.
Well, I'm afraid it simply does. It does condemn it, yes. It calls it, the official word is disorder, but it was refined by the current pontiff, Ratzinger, who called it a moral evil. But on the other hand, we must remember, as the point that was made, is that the Church is very loose on moral evils, because although they try to accuse people like me who believe in the empiricism and the Enlightenment of somehow what they call moral relativism, as if it's some appalling sin, where what it actually means is thought, they, for example, thought that slavery was perfectly fine, absolutely okay, and then they didn't. They thought until the year 2000 that a baby went to limbo, causing unbelievable distress to parents whose child died. Okay. Unbelievable distress. And then, with a wave of the hand and a stamp of a seal, it was no longer true. Something that had been eternally, or at least true for 2,000 years, suddenly wasn't. Because the truth is complicated. It's hard. And what is the point of the Catholic Church if it says, oh, well, we couldn't know better because nobody else did? Then what are you for?
Okay.
I think it is high time. I didn't want to get into too much theology tonight, but I think it's high time that this interpretation of limbo by Stephen Fry was questioned. What limbo was straightforwardly a place where they waited for the second coming. That is all.
It's a long wait.
Long wait, yeah, long wait.
The Catholic Church condemns the act but not the individual. Did Jesus Christ himself actually say anything about homosexuality?
That is a wrong question in this regard. Because we are not aware about homosexuality, the morality of homosexuality being a matter that drew the attention of Jesus. But Jesus certainly spoke about the Ten Commandments and adultery. But to come to the position of the Church of homosexuality, it recognizes there are people who have homosexual tendencies, and they even consider themselves as such. But the Church also says that the homosexual acts are wrong, but that doesn't mean that those who are engaged in it are condemned outright, because each person has his own personal story. There is room for that. I do not think we should deny the Church the right to propound its own doctrines. You are not obliged to take it.
This is a point specifically to the Archbishop. He spoke about his father and how before becoming a Christian, his father had a basic grasp of the Ten Commandments. He seemed to use this as a point to prop up his own argument. I would argue the contrary. Surely, if people have a grasp of basic morality without the dogma, the doctrine of the Church, then everything good, all the humanitarian aid, all the great work that the Church has been doing that you've spoken about, surely that's not the Church, that's just people that happen to be under this umbrella of the Church. It's the people that are doing it, not the dogma of the Church.
I spent 38 years of my life as a Catholic, and then I saw the light. And my life now is going back and forth to Africa And next month I go to Uganda, and I'm working on trying to stop mothers dying in pregnancy and childbirth. What I'm saying is, please, please, reverse the rule on condoms and family planning and contraception and save more lives, save thousands.
Just a question for the Archbishop. I'd like to know how you calculate the figure of how many Catholics there are in the world. I was baptised a Catholic, I'm now atheist. I presume it's done by baptism records, and I'm calculated as a Catholic.
Okay.
And why can I not now disassociate myself from the church?
All right. I want you to vote again. You've heard the presentations, you've heard some of the responses and some of the points that have been raised by the audience here. So Stephen Fry, final statements, please.
Well, it's been a really interesting debate, and I've loved some of the questions from the floor. I suppose I'm slightly disappointed that Anne Widdecombe in particular should say, oh, I knew they'd bring up condoms and child rape and homosexuality. It's a bit like a burglar in court, so you would bring up that burglary and that manslaughter. You never mention the fact I give my father a birthday present. You know, it's, yes, are you getting the message? There is a reason we hammer home these issues, because they matter. They matter to people's hearts and souls. I make no apology to the lady who said this is supposed to be intelligence squared. Why are you being so emotional? We're talking about religion and souls here. I make no apology for being emotional about that subject. Don't tell me there's some magisterial and mystical reason behind limbo that I'm too stupid to understand. That's not good enough. It really isn't. The problem with mysticism is it begins in mist and ends in schism. It's terribly disappointing to hear that those who want to stand up for a church that is based on a founder who was put to death by capital punishment, who, for all we know from what he said, seemed to be very, very understanding, imaginative, pure, simple, remarkably intelligent in a Socratic kind of way. And he is represented by, really, I'm afraid, pretty low-rent intelligences and pretty low-rent imaginations. They are not connected at the moment, it seems to me, with the aspirations and desires of the human race. There's such an opportunity, owning 1 billion souls at baptism, that can never be unowned, to answer that lady's question, until she's excommunicated. So yes, you are counted. It's such an opportunity to do something remarkable to make this planet better. And it's an opportunity that is constantly and arrogantly being avoided, and I'm sorry for that.
Okay, thank you. Against the motion, Christopher Hitchens.
Now, 2 people asked me to be very quick and do world poverty and the Holocaust, and I'll do that. There is only one cure for world poverty that's ever been found or ever will be, and it's very simple. And it can be phrased very simply too. It's called the empowerment of women. Make them not just the beasts of burden and the beasts of childbearing that they become, and the floor will rise, it just will. It never fails anywhere. Against this one solution, the Catholic Church has set its face. The efforts of the missionary church in the Third World mean more people die, not less. It's as simple as that. More famine, more disease, more ignorance, more random and avoidable death. To the Holocaust, sir, that the church preached that the Jewish people were collectively responsible for the death of Christ until 1964, till nearly 20 years after the Nuremberg trials, may or may not have something to do with the availability of a reservoir of anti-Jewish hatred in countries like Poland, Spain, Italy, Germany, Austria, and elsewhere. I think it does have something to do with it. The 10 Commandments, 3 of them are awe-inspiring. They're about being afraid of a totalitarian figure. 3 of them are ordinary morality. We know of no code of ethics ever found, and the Archbishop bears me out on this, that recommends murder, theft, or perjury. Putting adultery on the same level as that may not be morally advisable. Saying that covetousness should be considered in the same light as a crime, in other words, a thought crime. You're condemned now for something you're thinking, and it may be something that leads you to enterprise and emulation. That's forbidden too. That's very, very iffy, it seems to me, and there's a very iffy part of it which lumps those you mustn't covet in with the animals and the chattels and your property, and those who it lumps in are your womenfolk. And do you seriously expect to be taken seriously if you say that that commandment, that does reduce women to beasts of burden and childbearers and chattel has nothing to do with the appalling position of women, not just in poorer societies, but in ours as well. Again, for shame if you can feel it. Now, unanswered questions. Amazing. I asked, where is Cardinal Law, Bernard Law, and why? I have an authority here. He ducks the question. He also says that the church advises against homosexuality. It teaches against it. No, it doesn't. Any more than it teaches against divorce or contraception. Where it can, it bans these things and punishes them and writes them into the criminal code. If all you were doing, sir, ma'am, were offering advice, we could probably be fine with it. No one, though they were asked repeatedly, would say whether they thought Stephen Fry, my friend, was in a state of mortal sin or not. They wouldn't tell you. Something about the question brought out their inner coward. When my children were young, I'd have been proud to have Stephen as their babysitter, and I'd told them they were lucky. And if anyone came to my door as a babysitter wearing holy orders, I'd call first a cab and then the police. And it's your fault, sir and ma'am, it's your fault that that's true, and that everybody knows it's true. How you can live with it, I don't know. Now, relativism, I thought we were agreed. But Anne Widdecombe says slavery has to be considered in context. What's more relative than that? And there were innumerable humanists and secularists who said slavery is evil. The church wouldn't agree. Now, which is it then? Is it that the church is wrong, or, even more suggestive, that God has not yet revealed that it's wrong to them? Or did God support it all those years and then change his mind? From a beginning point of absurdity, you arrive at a terminal point of absolute moral chaos. And I think you've at least done us the favor of making that plain this evening. God did not make man in his own image. It is precisely to the contrary. Mammals and primates made many gods and many churches in their own rival images. If these churches and faiths were invented by primates who are only half a chromosome away from a chimpanzee, which happens to be the case, it would explain a lot, would it not? First of all, we believe, we more or less know, there's no such thing. But if you confess your sins specifically, if you name them and don't just make them general, if you do so truly repenting of them, without any purpose of evasion, and if you make a firm purpose of amendment, you might be able still, while there's time, to live with your consciences. I wish you all the luck in the world in pursuing that course of action.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me remind everybody that before the debate, when everybody came in, this is how you voted. For the motion that the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world, 678. Against the motion, 1,102. And the undecideds, the don't knows, were 346. This is how you voted subsequently. For the motion that the Catholic Church is a force for good, from 678, it's gone to 268. Against the motion, it's now 1,876. And you can see that doesn't leave very many don't knows. It's 34 undecided. So commiserations, Archbishop and Anne Widdecombe. Congratulations, Stephen Fry and Christopher Hitchens. Thank you all.